Borderlands 4 looks to be turning things around for the franchise after a pretty polarizing game in Borderlands 3, where it wasn't necessarily bad, but it also wasn't necessarily good. But that doesn't seem to be the case for Borderlands 4 based on all of the previews that are out there already. There are so many huge and mostly impressive changes that they're making in order to make this game a hit, and so today I wanted to run you guys through some of the biggest and best changes coming to Borderlands 4. Now, I think the most obvious place to start off when it comes to talking about huge changes is to do with the movement, because it seems like they are going all out on improving and essentially changing the movement in Borderlands 4 compared to all of the previous titles. Now, that's not to say that Borderlands has had bad movement in the past, but I think it has been in need of a bit of a revamp over the last couple of titles now. And like I said, it seems as though that is definitely going to be happening in Borderlands 4. Now, the most exciting part of this to me is that we will now have access to a jetpack that allows us to double jump as well as sideways dash. And it also gives us the ability to even glide from ledges. So instead of jumping off a ledge, for example, and just falling straight to the ground, you can actually glide down. You can even glide a little bit more horizontally and maybe get over to another ledge rather than going all the way down to the ground. To me, this seems like a great addition that I'm pretty surprised hasn't actually come earlier. Now, I mentioned this in my previous video. Maybe I'm going crazy here, but I'm pretty sure in the pre-sequel there was something along the lines of this, because there were some space missions in that game, and I do recall some level of like double jumping or at least gliding around. So be sure to leave a comment and let me know. It's been years since I played the pre-sequel, but it feels like they've kind of touched on this a little bit in previous games, whereas now it feels like they're fully fleshing that out, which I'm very excited to see. They've also confirmed that there is going to be grapple hooks that will not only obviously allow us to grapple onto ledges and onto rooftops and stuff like that, but we can also grab smaller objects within the world. They gave an example where you can essentially grab an explosive barrel with your grapple hook, and then you can also throw that back at enemies, which just adds another layer to the combat as well. Apparently this all really shines in the combat, so the overall movement and just fluidity of the game is improved, but the combat feels even further improved as well, just purely based on the movement, which to me is really exciting. Again, it's not like the movement has been poor in previous games, and it's not even like the combat has been poor either, but I do think it was in need of some level of innovation, and this seems like that is most likely going to be it. Now, something else very exciting, and this is a pretty big change as well, is to do with the weapon manufacturers. Now, I'm sure if you guys have played previous Borderlands games, you'll know about the manufacturers. As an example, one of them was Jacobs, where they were all pretty standard weapons that just shot regular bullets. They always tended to deal pretty good damage, but they also had pretty low ammo counts. There was then the Malawan manufacturer that had the elemental damage, so pretty much every Malawan gun dealt some sort of elemental damage. There was also then TDR, who would make weapons that when you reloaded it, instead of actually reloading a new magazine, you would just throw the old gun and it would essentially turn into a grenade exploding, and then you would spawn a new weapon in your hand. So I'm sure you guys know that already, and that is very much going to be the case again in Borderlands 4. They're not moving away from that, but within that system they are making some pretty big changes. Now, the first change is that we're actually getting 3 new manufacturers in Borderlands 4, which is very exciting. I could be wrong on this, but I don't feel like they've really added or changed any of the manufacturers over the last few games. But we are now confirmed to be getting 3 more in Borderlands 4, those being Daedalus, Order, and Ripper, who are the 3 new manufacturer companies, though we don't really know a whole lot about their definitions just yet, at least not based on what I've read from all of the previews and stuff anyway. Now, that in itself is a pretty decent change, but on top of that, and this is the most exciting part to me, is you can actually now chop and change parts from each manufacturer. And for example, your gun might have 4 different parts that are actually from 4 different manufacturers, therefore kind of getting the best of both worlds, taking the best parts from each of those manufacturers and almost crafting your own gun. For lack of a better word, it's almost like you've got attachments now where you can actually customize your weapons, and to me that is really, really exciting. As an example, again, you could use a Jacobs barrel, for example, where it deals really good damage, it doesn't have too much ammo, but it is just a pretty standard gun. You can then have a Malawan attachment where it adds some sort of elemental damage to it. And then, like I mentioned before, you could have a TDR magazine where instead of actually reloading the gun, you're now throwing it like a grenade and a new one spawns in your hand. Previously, each weapon only had one manufacturer, but now that you can chop and change, to me, that is something that is super exciting. Not only kind of adding even more weapons to the game, which is kind of insane when you think about how many weapons this game has, but also just allowing us that extra bit of customization. Now, quickly touching on the map, we don't know too much about it just yet, and I'll do a full video on the map once I learn a little bit more about it. But what I do know is that there's going to be 4 open zones in Borderlands 4, which is a little bit different to how it's been in previous games, where it felt like there was actually way more than that, but they were also probably a lot smaller. And one issue that caused was that there was a lot of times you had to sort of get to the edge of a zone. You go up to the little gate thing, I'm sure you guys all know, and you sort of travel to that next zone. And although that's fine, it did result in a lot of loading screens, especially if you were sort of constantly going in between a few different zones. And so now it seems like there's going to be a lot less, which some people might see as a negative. And I think if done poorly, it could be a negative, but hopefully if they do it properly, all it really means is we're getting less loading screens and likely far bigger areas, making the map feel a little bit closer to an open world map rather than just a bunch of different open zones. Now, before we go any further, if you guys are new to the channel and you're interested in more Borderlands 4 content in the lead up to launch and plenty more after launch too, be sure to hit that subscribe button because there is so much content on the way, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, another pretty damn big change they're making is actually to do with the Vault Hunter's abilities. I'm sure you all know that we used to just essentially have one ability per character, and you usually had like a sort of passive trait as well. But we are confirmed to now have 3 abilities per Vault Hunter that we can cycle between at will, which is absolutely awesome in my opinion. Now, the main reason that I really like this is that it allows for a lot more sort of customization in your playstyle. So if there's a character that you really like, but maybe their ability didn't stand out to you that much, now that's not really going to be an issue because there should be a lot more choices when it comes to those abilities, whether you use all 3 regularly or whether there's just one that you really like and you pretty much only use that one. I think it just allows a lot more customization in the way that we play. I also think it's going to be awesome in the fact that it'll sort of free you up in different boss fights. Now, as an example, maybe you really like a melee ability from Rafa, or it's really good against regular enemies, but maybe you get to a certain boss who deals heaps of damage to you up close, and it's the type of boss that you really want to stay away from. Well, in that case, your melee ability wouldn't be that good. And in previous titles, if you only have the one ability, that kind of made you feel as that character like you were a little bit underwhelming, and it almost nerfed you in specific fights, for example, where now that ability might still not be great, but you can now cycle between 2 other ones, which will allow you to maybe use a little bit more range and just play differently. And it might help a hell of a lot in those really difficult boss fights where your favorite ability just isn't as good, but at least now we have some options. Now, another huge change that they're making is actually to do with how you heal in this game, to do with the new system called rep kits. Now, obviously in Borderlands, it's always generally been that you go and like pick up health from dead enemies in the little red vials. Once you kill someone, you can obviously find these in like chests and stuff like that as well. But we now know that we're actually going to be healing ourselves with what they're calling our rep kits. Now, my assumption is that this is going to be pretty similar to how we pick up and equip different shields that have different stats. So there's no such thing really as like the best shield. It all comes down to how you play. Some of them had way more damage reduction, for example, but that would take a lot longer to recharge. Some of them had cool bonuses where when it depleted, it would explode and anyone nearby would essentially be taken out. And I have a feeling it's going to be pretty similar with the rep kits, where there will be different ones we can pick up. Maybe one has less health charges, but each charge heals you to full health, for example, or vice versa. There'll be some that have like way more health charges, but they're a little bit smaller. And some will no doubt have some other crazy elements to them as well in typical Borderlands fashion. So to me, I'm really excited to see how that plays. I feel like that's one thing that now I look back at it, it is kind of annoying in previous Borderlands games to be really low on health and you have to actually go and like pick up the health, which can put you in even more trouble. Now we can take a bunch of damage and we can actually just get behind cover and heal ourselves up, which is going to be a lot more enjoyable, at least for me personally. Now, there are two final things that I wanted to touch on that are a little bit smaller, but they're both really good changes in my opinion. First and foremost, there are now new vehicles called Digirunners that can essentially spawn anywhere in the world, and we can spawn them at will essentially. This means there is no more running to the old school catch a ride vehicle stations, where if your vehicle blew up, for example, you would have to kind of run to the next vehicle station, spawn a new vehicle, and then finally you'd be back in that vehicle. Now we can seemingly just spawn them from anywhere, which is great in my opinion, especially if the map has bigger zones. Vehicles are going to be even more important. Lastly, a really good quality of life change as well is that we can now quickly respawn bosses rather than having to actually reload the game to make that boss spawn again. And for any of you who are big farmers within Borderlands, I'm sure you guys know that you can essentially just kill the same boss over and over and over again in order to try and farm for the legendary weapons. And if that's you, well, this is going to make your life a whole lot easier. We no longer have to like reload the game or go to a different zone and then come back. We can now just quickly respawn that boss once we've killed them, and the next fight will essentially start, which makes it a hell of a lot easier to farm for those legendary weapons. But that is it for some of the biggest and best changes coming in Borderlands 4. There are actually plenty more as well, guys, but a lot of them are smaller. Though if you want to learn more about all of those, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I can always do a follow-up to this one, because there is definitely plenty to touch on there. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.